Okay. Excellent. Thank you. All right. Well, happy, glorious May afternoon. Nice to see everyone. Let's do a quick round of introductions just because Sebi and Philip are new to the conversation. Very glad to have you here. Michelle, nice to see you and great to see everyone. And do you want me just to go around on like who's in my little boxes on the screen? Okay, that'd be great. Okay, just sort of name and affiliation and anything else that you want to share, especially those of you who are sort of just joining the conversation. We can welcome. So Jared, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Jared Duval with the Energy Action Network and appointed to the seat on the Council for Energy and Data Analysis. Serve with Megan as co-chair of the Science and Data Subcommittee of the Council, and then also on the Council Steering Committee, the Cross-Sector Mitigation Subcommittee, and this task group. So do you want to call them out, Jared? Or do you want me to pass the baton?
Maybe I'll just call them out in part because I forgot to introduce myself. Johanna Miller, Joey, and I'm the House-appointed environmental rep on the Council and helping to lead this conversation as the Transportation Task Group co-lead and I'm going to turn it over to Sebi. You're next on my screen.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be in this Zoom room with you all. For the first time, I'm Sebi Wu, Climate and Equity Advocate at VPIRG, the Vermont Public Interest Research Group, and I was recently appointed to the Just Transition Subcommittee, and so I am here liaising for that group.
That's great. Colin? Thanks, Sebi.
Thanks, Joey. Colin Smythe, Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation, Air Quality and Climate Division. I'm an environmental analyst who works on the greenhouse gas inventory, among other things.
Excellent, thank you. And Philip, way to model the conversation with your backdrop. Introduce us. Yeah.
Today it's a regular bike. Some days it's a e-cargo bike for the toddler. Hi, Philip Peacott, Department of Public Service, which is our state energy office, and also ratepayer advocate. And so I'm glad to be joining the task group for the first time today.
It's great. It's nice to have you and have a couple new folks. Michelle.
Hi, Michelle Boomhauer. I'm the Division Director for Policy Planning and Intermodal Development, which includes our public transit, rail, aviation groups, as well as our innovations and sustainability group, environmental policy, et cetera. I am the Secretary of Transportation's representative of the Climate Council, and I have been an intermittent participant in both this task group and the subcommittee on, my mind has just gone blank, your subcommittee. I am recovering from the legislature and hope to get my mind back after going on vacation in a few days. So I've been involved on behalf of the agency in our climate work since we really became fully engaged in this over the past 5 or 6 years. And I was also the agency representative to the TCI discussions more recently, something that Gina Campoli was really the godmother of, so to speak.
That's great. Thanks, Michelle. Andrea.
Hello. Andrea Wright, Environmental Policy Manager at VTrans and on the Cross-Sector Mitigation Subcommittee, and been involved in this task group since I started in this role at the beginning of the year.
Awesome. Great. Megan.
Hi, my name is Megan O'Toole. I'm the Climate Change Mitigation Coordinator with the Air Quality and Climate Division at DEC, and I serve as co-chair on Science and Data along with Jared, and I'm also a member of the Cross-Sector Mitigation Subcommittee, and I've also worked on other fun things with Michelle and others like TCI and lots of other exciting things. So that's me. Nice to meet you.
I'll skip over Jane, but I think we all know who Jane is, the director of the Global Warming Solutions Act, and really hoping you are okay, friend. Greta, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Greta Hassler. I'm the Energy and Climate Program Associate at VNRC. I work with Joey, and I've just been sitting in on these meetings and helping with note taking. So it's nice to see everyone.
Thank you. Karen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Karen. I never know if I'm supposed to have my video on or not because I'm not like an official member of these meetings, but I'm a policy analyst with AOT.
That's great. Thank you. Well, you are more than welcome to have your camera on. This is a little less formal, so we welcome all input. And Deirdre.
Hi, I'm Deirdre Ritzer with the Air Quality and Climate Division. I'm in the mobile sources section. Nice to see you all.
That's great. Thanks, Deirdre. And Jane, I kind of swooped in, but if you want to actually introduce yourself or say anything, certainly please do.
Nope, that was all great. Thanks, you guys.
Awesome. And Jane dropped in the chat the agenda, and this is sort of just our standing agenda, which is obviously pretty bare bones and high level, but clearly the high level where we need to focus. Are there things that folks want to add or amend about the agenda before we sort of walk through it?
Does everyone else see it in the chat? Because I don't.
I do. I can drop it in again just because I don't know why that would be, but let me hang on one second. It's right here.
Oh, now I see it twice.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Okay, great, thanks.
This is one of the fun things about Zoom. I know there's a lot of deep love here for Zoom. If you come on just even a wee late, you miss anything that's been in the chat. So thank you for dropping that in again. And yeah, if folks have any addendums or amendments to the agenda, Michelle, I think one of the reasons we were hoping you were here is to give us a little bit of that was the one thing I was going to offer if you didn't proactively, but take it away.
Oh, now?
Well, just mean, I guess the thing is I'm hoping, and we can lead with it shortly after I.
Yeah, I've got a few slides on, some of the work we're doing right now that's going to feed into what these conversations have been, a little snapshot of the legislative funding profile following the end of the session, and then a little bit about the carbon reduction program. I got a lot of slides. I'm not going to do them all, but I will make sure you get them to send to this group.
Thank you. That's great. And if folks don't mind, I think it would be actually really helpful to have Michelle sort of tee us up and start us off before we go into like the standing components of the agenda. So does anyone have anything else that they'd want to either tease out on the agenda and or put on the agenda that may not be there? Okay. And of course, we can always, if anything comes to mind, certainly we can aim to address it. And then the other piece being Greta introduced herself, and she's an important member of my team, but thank you, Greta, for being willing and able to take notes. So that's really helpful. Okay, Michelle, if you want to just take it away, I think what you just laid out will be a helpful sort of framework for the ensuing conversation we're gonna have.
Sure, I'll go ahead and share my screen. Am I able?
Should be able to, or maybe Jane can ensure you are able to.
I seem to be doing it. Can you see my slides?
Not yet, says Michelle Boomhauer started screen sharing. Can anyone else see the slides? I cannot.
Let's see.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, they're coming up, and now I'm going to try and turn them into something that will move. Ah, there we go. Now I'm going to minimize all of you. All right. So this is pretty informal, and I attribute all information in this slideshow to other staff members, principally Andrea. And I received a big dump of information from everybody to organize into this presentation. So that's where we're coming from. So just first to start with what we are currently underway with, most of you know this, we have the vehicle miles travel study. It's about $150,000 investment by the agency, determining how smart growth strategies reduce VMT to meet our emissions reduction goals, and also to talk about co-benefits. And we hope to have the outcome of this report by September. And Joey, I'll leave it to you to manage like questions because I can't see anybody. So this project is almost underway, I'll say that. And then obviously in relation to the NEVI program for electric vehicle infrastructure, charging infrastructure that the federal government just commenced, we are developing our NEVI plan, which is a requirement before they will allow us to begin investing any of that money. And we're well on our way to having the plan ready to submit. I believe that this week or next, Patrick Murphy, who is our lead on EV deployment, is meeting along with Philip, I believe, with the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation to just take a walkthrough of the draft plan, and then it'll be under review by them. And then hopefully we'll hear something back by midsummer. We have EV incentives and a whole bunch more were approved or by the legislature. We're working with the Center for Sustainable Energy to develop and administer all of our EV incentive programs, except for Mileage Smart, which is administered by Capstone Community Action. And CSE, in terms of developing, is basically making the refinements that are needed coming out of this legislative session, most specifically the elevation of the cap from 40,000 to 45,000. And then there were a couple of other nuances in terms of the manufacturer's suggested retail price cap on this program. And then the e-bike incentive program, we had 50,000 from last year, another 50,000 added from this year. And then the Replace Your Ride program, which we will be very excited to get out there. CSE will be in place as of July 1st to administer the EV incentive programs. The bike program will be out shortly after that, definitely by the end of July, we believe. And then the Replace Your Ride program right after that. They've been working on these simultaneously. So anticipated activities coming up, Center for Sustainable Energy.
Can I ask just a couple questions? And if people had, if others had any questions, just really quickly, who's leading the VMT reduction study again with VTrans?
So that project is being done by VHB with subcontract to Resource Systems Group, RSG.
Excellent, thank you. And then, sorry, and maybe you'll get into it, but one other question is on Replace Your Ride. Are you going to talk about the dollars that went into these different programs a little bit through the new budget, through the budget?
Yep, I'll have a budget slide a little later.
Okay, because I mean, I have more of a public engagement question. I'm not sure when it's good to ask it. Okay, I'll ask it later.
Okay, that sounds good.
Sorry about that.
And
But if others
can I
have
just-
questions, yes.
I just wanted to point out on the vehicle miles traveled, it says the study is slated to yield a report by September, and that was what we originally had anticipated, but we have a little bit of a snafu with our contracting right now. So expecting a final report the first quarter of next year. It's going to be a little bit later than we anticipated originally. Sorry, Michelle, I just found that out after.
No problem. Contracting within state government, anything that has an element related to IT has become a minor disaster. So that's probably where that got caught up. All right, moving along. So on our anticipated activities, we have with the Center for Sustainable Energy, we are going to assess and make recommendations, and this will be like a 3-year project regarding our EV incentive program parameters, and both from an emissions reduction strategy objective and an equity objective. And we would be looking for an annual report over the next 3 years on not only how these programs are doing, but how the program is doing, but what tweaks we should be making to the program for the incentive programs to sort of best fit where we are in the market at that time. We obviously know that at some point in the future, I don't know if it'll be in the next 3 years, you know, at some point down the road, there may be the opportunity to, with prices of EVs coming down, that we may change our incentive model from what it is now, or we may find CSE works with a lot of different states. We may find that there are better ways to do it now that we just had not been aware of. So we're investing about $85,000 in that effort with CSE for the next 3 years. And Andrea, just chime in at the end of any of these if there's something to add. So, also coming in the future under the new Federal Highway Protect Act, which is really about resiliency, we will be having to develop a resilience plan, and that plan will basically set our match requirements and guide us with regards to what projects we would be targeting to implement. And once again, this is a federal program like many, for which the guidance has not yet been issued. So we don't have a lot on that one yet. Carbon reduction strategy, and I have several slides at the end, and I won't be reading through those, but I just wanted to summarize in one place all of the high-level elements of that. Many of you have probably read through the guidance that has come out from the federal government on this. But one of the key first steps related to the carbon reduction strategy is going to be undertaking a capital program, our agency capital program, GHG accounting, and developing methodology for that accounting and baseline information to allow us to then move forward with assuring that the investments that we're making with the CRP funding and with other federal funding we utilize are getting the biggest bang for the buck in terms of greenhouse gas reduction for CRP funded projects, and that we are being thoughtful relative to other projects which may have a variety of, or may have some alternatives in terms of how they're implemented. And I'll go into this a little bit more, but we would look to get started on this effort as soon as possible, potentially even going in for budget adjustment to request the funding be added to our FY23 program so we could get started on this. And we would be focusing on, and Andrea, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but in terms of the baseline, we would probably take the 2023 as passed, or would we be looking at the 2024?
I think that's to be determined, definitely the 23, and then determine if we need to go further into the to the next year. Then we might be starting to get a little bit into our strategy. So there's a little gray area there on what we'll do.
Yeah. And so there's kind of a two-phase process for this carbon reduction strategy. It is a required element for being able to utilize funds. However, we don't have to have the plan approved in order to begin to utilize fund. We just have to have it developed by November 15th of 2023 to continue to use funds. So in terms of our technical analysis.
Can I ask a question? Oh,
yes.
Well, one of the, Andrea has shared some of that, and this is super helpful, even further context. I'm wondering if, as other states too dig into this guidance, and you know, we have the climate action plan. I'm just thinking about in terms of, maybe it's a strategy question. This question is too early. Just wondering how you're all thinking about the carbon reduction plan vis-a-vis the climate action plan and how they align.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'll just, I address this on the next slide after this first one here. So I can talk about that in a minute. So basically, as I mentioned, phase one is about the impact of the AOT capital program on GHG emissions. And developing the methodology, coordinating with partners, testing, and also looking at our fleet operations, our buildings, our maintenance activities, etc. And this tool that we hope to emerge from this process with would allow us to have a more automated assessment process for going forward with our capital plans and reporting to the legislature with regards to our emissions environment. And then, as we just talked about a moment ago, applying potentially to the 24 capital program. And then phase 2 would be to identify the strategy that will arise once we have the baseline. And so figuring out, and this sort of takes into account the CAP and its objectives, but basically going across all of our programs, understanding how we can maximize the investment opportunities we have to drive GHG emission reductions, and then look at sort of honing those strategies through our budgeting process. And then sort of to help frame this a little bit, you know, the task, the scope of this would include identification and information gathering, evaluation and analysis of programs, which is what I just talked about, looking at across all of our programs, as I mentioned. The program list goes on and on. Looking at potential applications of funding through the carbon reduction program, using the CAP metrics, and we have a long list of the CAP metrics data that we have, and also related documents. So the CAP, the Comprehensive Energy Plan, the Transportation Energy Profile that we do every 2 years, the Zero Emissions Transition Plan, and then future documents that we anticipate to be coming, you know, forward as we go through these various processes and begin to adopt some of these efforts. So I'll pause there and see if I answered your question, Joey.
Yeah, no, I mean, you gave it some important flavor. Thank you. And I feel like it's probably something that will be answered over time. Jane.
Yeah, I would expect that, you know, once we have a draft scope of work, that would be something that we would share with this group to provide input into, so that we are very well informed in terms of advancing this process forward with as many considerations as need to be included to get the outcomes we're looking for relative to the carbon reduction program and our availability of activities.
Great. Michelle, you can't see probably, but Jane has a question. Go ahead, Jen.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Hey, Michelle, so is this very much, it's very much focused on like the programmatic level levers that AOT can pull to reduce emissions, but not, it's not, just to draw a distinction, it's not like the sector-wide analyses that this group has considered.
That is correct. And actually the slide that's on the screen now talks about the sector-wide analyses, I believe, but I could be wrong. There's so many analyses going on, I'm starting to lose a little bit of my grip on which is which. This technical analysis RFP is the one we've been talking about for the past several months, to fill in, to basically investigate how we fill in the TCI gap with other approaches and policies, actions, et cetera, and build off existing data and some that are currently under development that I just mentioned. And it would be used to define the emissions reduction Vermont is currently on track to achieve from the transportation sector. Does that sound like what you were thinking about, Jane?
Yeah, it is, yeah. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay.
I wish, it's kind of funny because I do feel like I wish we had in hand the study that you're talking about for the carbon reduction funding and strategy that like tells us really clearly about what we could achieve through programmatic adjustments. And then we're about to launch into this, but because it feels almost premature to do this simultaneously with programmatic ads.
And that's one of the things we have been talking about internally in terms of where we would potentially invest our resources for second and third. And that sort of comes to the second half of this slide, which is, we had committed $50,000 towards analyses through planning in our planning budget. And you saw where some of those investments are going on some earlier slides. You had been seeking 50 to 70,000 or more from the Climate Alliance. They've suggested they can only commit 21,000 and suggested that we use our CRP funds to conduct the analysis. And I would say that we agree that the CRP funds can be used for this purpose, but we, in terms of the order of priority of activities, we are looking at potentially having this, what's on the screen now, follow the other transportation technical analysis that we would be undertaking. I think in kind of a two-part answer to that would be, yes, we do need kind of the replacement fund strategy, but what are we already doing that could be modified and count towards the effort? And we have 3 years of funding that was just approved by the legislature for a lot of activity advancement. And, let's get those things going, get some of these studies done that I've talked about already today, and then move on to this technical analysis to address the TCI gap. And I'm sure there will be lots of different ideas on that.
I'll just kind of add to that, or we want to do that baseline first, and then we want to get into the strategies in the second year, because we can't really develop the strategy without knowing, having that methodology and analysis of our capital programs in the first place. So we have to develop that methodology and the baseline, and then move forward from there. In the guidelines for the carbon reduction program, it does mention state policy kind of things, or how to reduce emissions in the state. So we are thinking that's an opportunity to analyze more of a sector kind of thing. But we need to reach out to Federal Highway and confirm that. But again, that would be sort of in the second year analysis for a strategy. So it won't align with getting a recommendation from the council this year.
Yeah. And we can have more discussion about that maybe after I get done the slides, because that could take a bit of time.
Yeah.
Also, I think several people on this call are aware that the Georgetown Climate Center, not the council, but is interested in working with Vermont on some policy and technical analysis, and they are working to convene a meeting of some state level leadership to talk about this further in a month or two. So we'll see where that goes.
Wait, Michelle, Jared has a question, but really quick clarifying question on that last statement. They're interested in working with Vermont and other states, right? When you're talking about state leaders,
I missed that call.
Okay.
So it may be multiple. It's probably a multitude of states. You're probably right, because that was, the framework we came out of with TCI. So yeah. Andrea, you were on the call, I think.
Yeah, it was other states too.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Jared?
Thanks.
First, I just want to thank you for the overview, Michelle and Andrea, for all the work that you've put into preparing this. I just want to offer a different perspective about kind of, or at least my perspective, which I think is different than what you're presenting, about where we stand and just kind of the order of needed priorities. As I think about it, there's kind of two things that I think I see a little bit differently than the way they're being shared. One is, I don't see the gap that we're trying to address as trying to fill the gap of expected TCI revenue. I think what we're trying to do is identify the missing policy framework that can give us a high degree of confidence that we'll achieve the emissions reduction transportation sector wide, like we already have in the electricity sector, like we nearly had and will have to have in the thermal sector. I agree that this programmatic analysis is helpful and important, but to me, the type of adjustments that it may lead to in terms of capital budgets, in terms of incentive program design, they feel to me kind of necessary, but more kind of on the margins of kind of an implementation approach rather than the big picture. How do we achieve a high level of confidence that we're actually going to meet the emissions reduction requirements, and what is the policy framework that we should approach? The other context I'm thinking of is we have to make a recommendation to the council in November. And I know that these things are on different timeframes, but I can't help but seeing we're investing $150,000 in figuring out some of the potential emissions reduction benefits of VMT, and we can't pull together the funds to do a high-level policy analysis for our most basic responsibility in the CAP, which is to achieve these emissions reductions that I do not think, and I don't think anybody who's analyzed this thinks that we are on track to meet our legal requirement. So I guess my question is, I hope we can think about this in a different way, where first step is to figure out the sector-wide policy frameworks that can give us a much higher degree of confidence. Because the programmatic questions, I agree, we're going to learn more over time as they're implemented, as we get data, as evaluations are done of those, as we learn from other states. But if we go forward another year or two and we do not have an overarching policy framework of one or more of the type of options we've been discussing, I mean, I think every year we lose, it makes it that much more difficult to meet the targets, and it makes it that much more costly to meet the targets. So I'm really hoping that we can find a way to cobble together the funds so that we can have, if not the kind of a full analysis, at least more of an initial analysis comparing some of the transportation policy options sector-wide, because I think that many councilors who are going to have to vote on this in November are going to want that. And there's some great analysis that's already out there. We can piece that together, but you know, it feels odd to me that we would be focusing, and I know that different pots of money have different kind of eligibility and requirements and limitations, but it feels like we're focusing on a lot of side questions and not tackling the central question first.
That's some great observations. And that was one of my worries when we collectively got down the road of the VMT analysis. And how important is this really? You know, I mean, I don't see that we're going to necessarily get a lot of GHG reduction gains from the VMT reduction sector in terms of some of the things that are being analyzed, yet we were asked to make investments in that area versus what you're asking for now. And so all I can say is that that ship has sailed. In terms of the other analyses we have to do, if we're going to meet the CRP deadline to be able to continue to use those funds of next November, we have to start now doing the analysis that I described. Can we find other funds to, as you say, cobble together a plan for analyzing the policy objectives that might be put together? I think we just need a a more, a clearer plan with a clear scope and a clear budget, and clarity with regards to the availability of consultants that can do this work. And then potentially we can find those funds. I think the other consideration around that is, you know, we would need leadership engagement and sign off from our joint secretaries, Secretary Moore and Secretary Flynn in the 5th floor to make those investments. And so these are some of the considerations that are out there. And I'd welcome a smaller meeting once more of these details are available to determine, you know, what I would be communicating with leadership about in more specifics.
I mean, I would say that if I, for one, would just be happy to volunteer to help flesh out what some of the kind of goals and objectives could be for a more detailed kind of RFP or analytical approach on this that we could bring to this group for feedback. I don't know to what degree that is already developed. I see Jane has her hand up, but I think you're right, Michelle, that it's important to have that ready to go, because I feel like we're having too many conversations in the state where it's like chicken or egg conversations. And I wish we had this analysis, and we can't make a decision because we don't know this impact here, but then we're also not seeing that analysis move forward. And I think this is a really key piece for us to.
Yeah, I agree. Jane?
Well, I just wanted to remind us that we do already have the RFP fully drafted, actually, with those goals and questions, and Julie has already reviewed it and commented on it and provided thoughts and edits.
Has that been shared with the task group, Jane? I'm not recalling seeing that. Okay.
Yes, you were part. I think we were all part of drafting it. I mean, it's ready to go.
I'm not sure we've seen it since Julie looked at it. If there were any substantial changes.
Yeah, the comments were like Joe Segali, Julie, others within leadership actually reviewed, and Megan. Those, yeah.
Okay, so
and it may have been a while since this group has seen a draft. So I think, Jared, you're fair, and your misremembering is fair. I think it's been a while.
If anyone has their hands on a final, do you mind just re-sharing it?
I just want to be careful about sharing that, because I don't.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jane.
I just want to finish what I was saying, which is that we do have one. It's fully drafted. I know Secretary Moore and Joe and others have seen it, but I do just want to say that I think it would be naive for me to say that it's like a green light with Secretary Moore still, based on like everything that's happening with the Clean Heat Standard and other conversations now. So I just feel like, yes, we have a draft. It has goals. It has everything that we've talked about, but I think it's important to just know that we should regroup with leadership.
Yeah, I would echo Jane's response in that I've got to get back in the loop on this, and Secretary Flynn would need to be briefed, and there may be conversations at higher levels before it's ready to be re-released as a final draft for final comment. And I guess I would just ask that we take the time and opportunity to do that as expeditiously as we can. And I apologize for, there's so many of these things floating in my mind, along with legislative stuff, that I too had misrecalled where we are in the process.
Well, I think it's important to say that the one that's drafted right now was, to me, a slightly different intent under a different program, and it might not be exactly the way that I would want to send it out under the CRP funding. So I just need to kind of reconcile those two things and maybe make some changes to it, and happy to share that once I do, but.
Yeah, and I think there'll need to be some contemplation about, can the one document aid us in moving forward with both goals? So I think, Andrea, you have a really good point about that.
Yeah, no, that all makes sense to me. And but I think you were very clear, and I agree, Michelle, that we need a clear plan with a clear scope and a budget. And we need, and the marrying these two things so that the CAP and the CRP, which is a massive opportunity, add up. So to the degree you're able to keep us in the loop, and I think, we'd love to be helpful and to see something along those lines. So Jared already offered, I would lean on him, and I'm happy to help as well, but I feel like you guys have some capacity, but that seems like an important piece of work that we can have at the ready.
Yeah, and I think just to, I'll just sort of reiterate what was on those slides, is that the CAP did call for a sustainable transportation plan, I think is the term used in the CAP. And we really see what we're developing with the carbon reduction strategy, probably also with the resiliency, that there's a lot of overlap there. And so those two are going to inform what would be a sustainable transportation plan to us. So
that makes
we need
sense.
all this information.
Yeah. Actually, Michelle, when you were talking about the resiliency, or maybe Andrea, what is that component of the carbon reduction plan more specifically?
The carbon reduction plan is separate from the Protect grant program through IIJA. It's a whole different program, which the guidelines for that have not come out yet, but it is more focused on resiliency.
But does that mean like is that roads, bridges, like culverts? Like, do you have a sense of the scope? Because resiliency is big. Do you know?
Yeah, I don't. Okay. I don't know exactly, but I took it to mean the first thing that you said there, and not. But I'm sure it could cross over into other things too.
All right.
Related to transportation.
Yeah, I think it's all going to be transportation related. I think it'll be structural, materials based. It will also be workforce, resiliency as it relates to extreme heat and our ability to do our jobs. And it's probably going to be quite diverse in terms of anything transportation a DOT would encounter in a resiliency framework.
Oof, yeah, that's another big piece. Okay. Well,
so I don't
want to interrupt you, but I just want to do a little bit of a time check. It's 4:16, and I feel like, do you have other slides, Michelle? Or you want to?
Well, let me just double check to see where I'm at in that process. I did want to get up the budget slide relative to the legislature, and then maybe we can just leave it at that with the presentation. So let me get this going again. Okay. So can you see this slide?
Yep.
Multicolored. So, so these are all the climate change and climate mitigation related efforts that were put forth in the budget bill. And it includes across all the agencies, the governors recommend, House adjustments, Senate adjustments, the final, and then some notes on the side. I don't know that we need to unpack this, but I thought this was a really helpful slide that really captured everything in like one place in a coherent manner. So other than that, I just have a bunch of slides that are kind of a breakdown of the carbon reduction program, and I'm not going to walk through those, but we'll get you these slides afterwards.
Super helpful. One other question, and then maybe we can move on with this very helpful suite of information, which is, I've heard you talk about it before, but might be helpful for others to hear a little bit more about, and I would welcome an update on the anticipated budget shortfall. Is this?
Sure. I can also send this slide, but essentially the analysis we conducted relative to transportation fund revenues going into the out years, and honestly, this was compiled probably last November, so it doesn't even take into account the Ukraine crisis in its full extent. But we are obviously we have seen and will probably continue to see a reduction in fuel tax revenues for the transportation fund, as well as motor vehicle purchase and use, people buying cars, and due to the inflationary factors in the economy and concerns over availability of resources within household budgets, supply chain issues will impact purchases, and also registrations follow. If you're not buying the boat or the ATV or the car, you're not registering it. So we are anticipating, so that combined with the huge uptake in program funds, both formula funds and grant fund, discretionary funded projects. In terms of the funds that are available to us under the IIJA compared to the funds that we anticipate having, runs a gap over the next 3 to 4 years of anywhere from $60 to $80 million in transportation fund revenues. And so part of what we're working on in the current lead up to the next legislative session is, what kind of a budget package are we going to put forward? What kind of recommendations are we going to make? For those insiders that follow the transportation funding track, one of the recommendations the governor made during this past session was the essentially $22 million that moves from the transportation fund to the public safety fund for work that state troopers do on keeping track of transportation related safety issues on the roadways, speeders, and everything else. That rather than having those come out of the transportation fund, perhaps they just come out of the general fund relative to the the rest of the public safety budget. There's also a significant transfer of funds from transportation over to education. And, so we also paid off all of our outstanding bond debt. And so we have bonding resources available to us, and bonding in transportation goes towards the long range, very expensive projects, or at least long range projects, bridges, et cetera, things that are going to last for many, many years. And so there are a lot of pieces to this puzzle. And then we also have Justice 40, which ties in well with our climate needs and goals. And so, what this all looks like, obviously in this past session, the focus of investment for climate related activities was a general fund, and there was a lot of support. And in fact, the governor recommended things to be funded under the T fund that ended up getting transferred to the general fund. And I think there continues to be a concern, in particular in house transportation, with regards to is the T fund the right revenue source for funding broad-based transportation climate investments, or should those come from another resource? Like maybe they would have come from the TCI if that were here today, So it's going to be a very dynamic piece of work to put this together in terms of optimizing the investments. We have about 52% more federal money available to us under IIJA across the board. However, once again, we are feeling the pressures of inflation, of workforce and consulting and contractor availability, of supply chain issues. And so, you know, in the end, will we have as big a problem or not? Probably from inflation, yes, we'll probably get done the same amount of work that we ever got done, but we won't be able to take advantage of the, you know, 50% increase in resources. So it's quite a place to be when, you know, we would have thought we would have been heading into good times. So.
Michelle's terrible way to end of Monday.
Sorry.
We're not going to end there.
Please don't.
I appreciate the update and the reality check. There's a lot of different factors that are at play, clearly. Do other folks have questions for Michelle? This has been incredibly helpful, if not a little
eye-opening.
But others, anyone? We're still plowing forward. Okay. Well, please stay and if you are able, Michelle, I have a couple more questions, but maybe I will follow up or ask Andrea, who I'm sure will have the answers to them. I want to just make sure that we can move forward with other components of the agenda. But anything else before Michelle either leaves or is at least off the hook? All right, then let's keep the conversation going. One thing I would say about your slide on the budget, just so you know, the House passed version of the municipal resilience bill, I think was 48 million or 48.4. I think your slide says 35. So I'll look at it, but that was incredibly helpful. I, like Jane, would love to see that, the whole thing. Okay. Let's talk public engagement. So now we have completed 3 webinars. Thanks again to our friends at Vermont Clean Cities and to everyone else who helped lift those. I think they've been useful and well attended, although I'm not sure about the council participation, especially at the last one, but I think they've been good and I appreciate everyone's help. Do folks have thoughts on where from here based on what we put together and what else we need to be doing to continue to focus and engage the public on this? And one of the questions I have is, I was wondering if there's a public engagement component of the carbon reduction plan process. And I'm also would love to put Sebi on the spot to hear a little bit about, if from your perspective, beyond what we're doing and need to be doing with rulemaking. So I had a question and I was wanting to hear from Sebi, and I wanted to get an update on the rulemaking, which is the big public engagement.
Yeah, I am happy to step into the spot, although I don't think I have anything in particular that hasn't been said in these spaces before. Obviously, Just Transitions is focusing on moving forward with public engagement, and I think Jane has already presented to this group about the 3 kind of buckets of that, which is accessibility of the plan, and then traditional broad-based public engagement, and then longer term public engagement. And so I guess, are you asking in particular as it relates to the transportation task group?
Yeah, I just wanted to open up the floor if there was anything you wanted to share based on the conversations you guys have been having.
Thanks. Well, it's been, as a member of the public, trying to like catch up on some of this work. I guess since you said my name, I wanted to ask a question going back to what Jared was saying and kind of on my learning trajectory as a part of this task group. I deeply share his concern about you know, a broad-based policy approach to reducing our transportation emissions. And just as a matter of how this task group is working, I know I read through the memo that sort of had the carbon pricing, the standard, the cap and invest strategy. And so I really appreciated Michelle's presentation, but just like, is the task to come up with that, like, of this task group? Because I know that we're also informing some public engagement, which is important. And I know that there's like a rulemaking bucket of that, and then another bucket of it that's more general, more broad. And then, so I would love just to hear from people just in terms of my workflow and how I'm understanding what our task is. And then the last thing was just a question about the technical analysis that we were talking about a little bit ago. So basically, we want a technical analysis to happen, but it needs to be approved by the secretaries of Agency of Transportation, ANR, and the governor to issue an RFP for that technical analysis to happen. I apologize if I'm rambling and also kind of showing my ignorance, but figured since it's my first task group meeting. Michelle.
That's a great question, Zoe. As it relates to the fact that we would be participating financially in this effort, that's kind of the nexus between getting sign off on it. It's not as though they have to approve things this group does. It's really specific to the financing piece.
Jane?
Yeah, I was thinking, Sebi, that we need orientations to everything that we ask everybody to sit on now, but just we can share with you, and I'm sure Joey or Jared are too, but happy to have more conversation offline around how we got to this space and what this task group is up to. But I will say that, the main gist of this task group, and Jared alluded to this earlier, is that there's a gap in the plan because TCIP fell apart right before we signed the plan. And there was an acknowledgement that the council would need to do more work in the transportation space to bring forward recommendations. And originally the plan articulated a spring timeline of further considering recommendations in the transportation space. We said we needed more time and created, it's the timeline that needs to happen because of the statutory requirements of meeting our emissions reduction, but it's an artificial timeline. We said this fall, the council would consider an addendum to the climate action plan of recommendations. And they may choose to act and they may choose to not act. But the work of this group is to advance our knowledge and understanding to put forward recommendations with the cross-sector mitigation, because they won't actually come from this task group. They'll come from cross-sector mitigation to the council in the fall. And we should send Sebi our Gantt chart that Andrea put together, since that was is out the window now, but it did lay out all of the work that we saw as needed to get to the fall and to put forward the recommendations. It's helpful.
Yeah, I can forward that to you with, again, the Sebi, and to anyone else who might be interested. Again, it was revving up for filling in where we're focused on delivering a recommendation to maybe fill a TCIP gap. So share that with you. And in general, I think we're trying to figure out how to, fill this space productively and efficiently. Go ahead, Jared.
I just wanted to offer two friendly additions to what Jane said, and including what you just said, Joey. I know that, like, in shorthand, we've been referring to this as the TCIP gap, but I think what we really need to achieve based on the GWSA and the CAP is a minimum of a 40% reduction in emissions from the transportation sector by 2030, given the kind of baseline work we've agreed to in terms of sectoral proportionality of emissions reductions. And TCIP would have been the largest single policy to achieve those emissions reductions in the transportation sector, but it alone would not have been sufficient. So I just want to make sure that we're all clear that we're not just talking about filling a TCIP gap. We're figuring out what are the one or more lead policy drivers sector wide to get to that 40% reduction, because even TCIP on its own may have, it's difficult to assess state by state, but that was aiming at what, a 26% reduction by 2032, not even 2030. So the task is actually bigger than filling the TCIP gap. And I think we all know and agree on that, but I think it's worth underlining that. And then the other thing, in terms of the timeline that Jane said, I would just note that originally what we committed to in the CAP was a recommendation by, I believe, June. And then that got pushed to November. And I think Jane is right that it will be a council decision about when and how to make that recommendation. I'll just say for myself personally, I would be very uncomfortable going any longer than we already have, given what I see as our charge in statute and our legal responsibility to have a plan that can add up and do what we were given the responsibility to do. I'm just really uncomfortable with things continuing to slip and get pushed back, because it's going to make it that much more difficult to meet our requirements. So I think that if we want to have a certain level of analysis by November, I'm going to advocate that we not go any farther past November. And if folks want certain analysis by then I think we need to mobilize to figure out how we can be creative to get those resources so that analysis will be ready, and not, go another couple months, say, oh, we couldn't find the resources, so let's push this to 2023. I don't think that's a tenable approach. So I'm hoping we can work together collaboratively, creatively, to figure out how we get those resources to do that analysis, so we can not punt yet again on a recommendation.
Thank you, Jared. I share a lot of what you're laying out there. Indeed. Jane, go ahead.
Yes, that was all really helpful. Jared, I do just want to put out there, just to be brutally honest at this point around timeline, is that without posting of an RFP now, there's no way that we'll have anyone under contract until the end of summer or September. I just realistically know what it's taking the state to put RFPs in contract. So just want to, I'm not saying we shouldn't collaborate and figure this out, but we do need to also appreciate the really tight timeline we're being dealt with now with the moving target of how to fund this.
What else in that space? So I'm looking at the time, it's 4:35. Do people have thoughts about next steps with public engagement in this space? It feels like this is not, I mean, if people have ideas about other things we should be doing, but it seems like, let's talk about rulemaking, the link between the broader based engagement that is for the council that's underway, and how we can link to that. That seems important. Is there anything else we want to say about public engagement, or can we move into the rulemaking conversation? Or any other questions Sebi or others have? Okay. I don't want to, so is Deirdre still here? Or I don't know if Megan, do you want to give us an update just to bring everyone onto the same page of rulemaking and sort of timeline and the public engagement components as they are sugaring out at this moment?
Yeah, and I'm happy to answer any questions about the materials that we distributed last Monday too, if this group has had a chance to take a look at them and wants to kind of flesh anything out. I know we provided a lot of information in that package, so I'm happy to answer those questions too if we have time. I think in terms of the public engagement timing, as we've talked about before, we're required to hold a series of public rulemaking hearings geographically distributed across the states, focusing on areas that are disproportionately impacted by the impacts of climate change. And our plan, I think, is to obviously meet the minimum requirements in the APA for what we need to do to hold a rulemaking hearing. And that's typically, for us, the law is not crystal clear in terms of a certain set of things that need to happen at that hearing. But typically what we do is we provide background information on the rule, and then we give members of the public an opportunity to make verbal comments that are then recorded And then we respond to those comments in our responsiveness summary before the rule goes to the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules. So that is the kind of bare essentials for our hearing needs. And then I know we had talked previously about potentially, taking advantage of these events to, have other engagement with the public about where we are in planning for transportation sector emission reductions more generally. I think, logistically, this is a much higher bar, heavier lift than we typically do. And so, having the support of this task group in coordinating those hearings, I think would be really, really helpful for ANR folks. For timing, if assuming that we stay on track and we file our proposed rule with the Secretary of State on July 15th, are the earliest that we can have a public hearing is August 19th. But I think just given summer schedules and school starting and things like that, we had talked previously about waiting until early September, after the Labor Day holiday to start a roadshow for the rulemaking hearings. So I think that's it.
Thank you, Megan. Very helpful. I have a question, but do others have questions or comments first? So my question, you've alluded to this before. I think we've sort of danced around it and talked a little bit about, but rigorous public engagement for rulemaking, which is interesting in general and or also interesting when it comes to things like advanced clean cars 2 and advanced clean trucks, because the onus is largely on the manufacturers. And so what that means for the general public, I mean, so are there, it seems like an opportunity there to educate them, give them an update and meet the letter of the law. And again, as you said, it feels like even more of an opportunity to have that public engagement serve multiple purposes.
Yeah, I mean, I think if the, part of our obligation in the GWSA is to communicate to the public the emissions benefits that we expect to see from these rules. And so I think that's going to be a matter of public interest in terms of what the benefits will be from a climate change mitigation perspective. But yes, I agree with you, Joey.
Do you think, it seems like this is not the moment at 4:41, but that seems like for an ensuing agenda item to sort of brainstorm what that could look like to, again, meet the letter of the rules and then also go beyond.
Yeah, and in our letter to the Climate Council last week, or Julie's letter to the Secretary, Secretary Clauser, we indicated that we'd be working with this task group to really flesh out a detailed plan. And I think those details include where, the Global Warming Solutions Act is not specific on the number of hearings or their exact location, but they do say that multiple hearings need to take place in the communities that I described previously. And so I think it would be great for us to brainstorm about where we should have those hearings. If we could partner like we did when we were doing TCI public engagement with the regional planning commissions to help locate venues and have just the support of those organizations potentially. And maybe that's something that Chris could help us with when he's able to join us again. And then, how many and when. So, yeah.
Okay, well, maybe we can add that to the next meeting's agenda or in a pretty quick ensuing meeting agenda. Jane, go ahead.
Megan started to touch on it, which was really great. I in my conversations with Megan outside of these group meetings, we've talked a lot about like relying and trying to get support through partners like RPCs or VNRC and others. So it'd be great to have a conversation with this group focused in on that, and then thinking about where we could find added capacity through the support of organizations like yours.
That's great. I'm sure Greta is capturing this as like some part of like a to-do for next agenda item. Thank you so much again, Greta. And we can build that component of the agenda out, like the brainstorming on those core components and those partners and other potential partners. Okay, that is great. And I just thank you again, Deirdre, Megan, Colin, everyone on the DEC team who put so much work into all that you delivered and presented to the council and all that you're continuing to do on this. This is really big, really important. Thank you. Michelle, you came on. Do you have something you wanted to comment? Okay. In terms of other things that we want to cover today, unless, again, folks have any other ideas for webinars, let's maybe just put a pin in that and come back to whatever other opportunities or needs that people see. All input always welcome, especially those of you who are conferring with other states. It could be very helpful. I mean, if other states are looking at some of these strategies and or, you know, there's like the Andrea's peer in other states coming to, I don't know, some, you know, obviously TCIP was attractive for a variety of reasons. Certainly wasn't the panacea, as Jared pointed out, but doing this work regionally, it would be really great if we were doing this work at the federal level, but to the degree we can partner and benefit from the efforts going on elsewhere would be incredibly helpful. So put your brainstorm hats on and let's look at those opportunities. Yeah, so Jane, are you talking about the climate protection program? I'm just looking at Jane's comments in the chat.
We're having some conversations internally just to learn more about that. And it might be nice at some point to have that we've lost the clean heat standard for this just right this moment, to think about not looking sector by sector, but is there an opportunity to combine?
Yeah, and I guess, sorry, if it's okay, I just wanted to share a reflection of what I'm starting to think. If we do not have analysis that compares and contrasts different options, my default position would be, you know, when we scan the states, provinces, countries that have made the most progress in emissions reduction, investing in programs that, you know, improve transportation access and equity, I think what we see is they're not choosing one policy framework, they're choosing multiple. You know, California is doing a cap and invest program. They have a low carbon fuel standard. They have advanced clean cars too. And my sense is if the in-depth analysis that we want doesn't happen, I think we're going to be on safest ground to recommend that the legislature explore and advance multiple strategies at once, because it may end up being that the kind of in-depth analysis and testimony that needs to happen in order to fully flesh out, analyze, and compare these would have to happen through the legislative process. And so if we're not able to do that over the next few months, I think what I would lean towards would be a recommendation in November that we begin advancing multiple policy options, because I think that multiple policy options, A, gives us the greatest degree of confidence, and B, it would be premature to take anything off the table at this point. And I think that specifically would have to include performance standard programs like clean transportation or clean fuel standard if we look cross sector, or cap and invest programs, either sector specific or economy wide.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's I agree with you, Jared, and I think that you know, the modeling that we would need to have done to inform the impacts and the effectiveness of these options, you know, would likely look at whether or not a program existing you know, as an umbrella of all of these other kind of complementary policies that you talk about would impact those outcomes. And, you know, depending on what the umbrella is and what's underneath the umbrella, you know, so I think there's some really good examples of that analysis that are out there now that we could potentially emulate in terms of our own exploration. But yeah, what exactly we want to prioritize in terms of what would be the umbrella program that all of those other programs need to live underneath would be an important question for this group to continue working on.
I agree. And one other thought, and maybe this isn't like a webinar, although it certainly could be open to the public, but just to put it out there as food for thought, and maybe Sebi, do you think it would be helpful? I mean, I feel like we're kind of following what like Just Transitions is doing, and we're now having, but would it be helpful to have a co-meeting to like share with them, this is what we're working on, like just like the subcommittees or the task groups and this, because I would, you know, I'd like to get as much context and input as possible from considerations through the equity lens that we should be taking into account if we ramp to put an RFP out there, as we ramp the rulemaking stuff, and as we look at the kind of like regulatory or policy tools. It's just it's not a very fully baked thought, but if we have a moment of time to do some comparing notes and collaboration, I don't think that would be time, you know, misspent.
And Joey, just building on that, I think the rulemaking hearing requirement in terms of where we need to be engaging with people, it would be great to collaborate with the Just Transition Subcommittee on whether or not that's an appropriate list. Whatever I don't have a list yet, but whatever we do come up with.
They can help create a list. Anyway, food for thought in case that's helpful, but I'd love to try to, you know, pair these conversations up to the degree, you know, as early and often and much as possible. So, all right, it is getting late. My computer's about to die. Oh, go ahead, Sebi. And then I'm gonna probably, unless anything else, anyone has anything else, turn it over to public comment. Go ahead, Sebi.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, appreciate you raising that. It's part of why I'm here. And Just Transitions, as you probably know, just onboarded a few new members. So hopefully we'll have more capacity, but yeah, I wouldn't rule it out. I also wouldn't presume that folks are necessarily having the capacity or desire. And I would really want to be thoughtful that we, like, I really appreciated, I think it was a webinar, I don't remember exactly what it was called, but the walkthrough from Secretary Moore and Jared of kind of the options. And so I guess I want to go back to, are we discussing and considering those on this timeline among this task group, or are we mostly talking about other things that isn't directly that task while we wait for potentially more analysis? And I know we've like kind of gone back and forth about talking about different subjects, but if we were to sort of get to more clarity around where we're headed in suggesting something for the council to suggest, maybe that would make a more productive meeting. Because I know that transportation webinar was really informative to me, and so you know, there's recycling that can be done if like the Just Transition Subcommittee were to watch that on double speed. So I would just want to be thoughtful about what we're hoping to get out of the conversation.
Yeah, of course. And go ahead.
Sorry, Joe. I was just going to say, Sebi, if it made sense, like for a Just Transition Subcommittee meeting agenda, to watch that in advance and have, you know, some members of this task group join for a conversation when you're already meeting rather than doing something separate, I'd certainly be up for that. Hopefully other folks could make it work too, if there were kind of questions, feedback, discussion.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was just going to say. Yes, I wasn't intending to be like, make them come to an hour and a half meeting here, but potentially just finding some way, whether it's at an agenda piece of ensuing meeting. That'd be great. So put it on the table if you don't mind, and just if there's input you have or others, just put it into the hopper for how do we enrich this conversation and the work. Okay, 4:53. I'm now plugged in. Welcome to my living room. And let's turn to public comment. If anyone else has, and just know, again, these meetings are not incredibly formal, so welcome that at any time. Any brilliant ideas that people have and or thoughts just to add to the conversation would be welcome.
That noise you hear in the background is my son playing. It was not him wanting to make a public comment, although I should ask him if he wants to at some point.
That's awesome. Okay. Next Monday's Memorial Day. I think Jane has already taken this off of people's calendars, so we will regroup about 2 weeks from today. And yeah, if folks at any time have any other, besides the standing agenda, if there's anything else that we want to get into a little bit more deeply, obviously communicate in between and we can add it to the agenda. But this has been really helpful. Thanks again to Greta for taking notes. I think there's some concrete, lots that we went through today, some concrete next steps and to-dos. And thank you, Michelle, for coming and providing that really important, useful context and some follow-up is going to be needed. All right, all enjoy this gorgeous day.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
So-
Bye.